How's life, everybody? My name is Glitchstick, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit about my adventures in Telltale's The Walking Dead. This was the first game that I ever played that had a choose-your-own-story adventure style, so I'm going to be discussing a lot of the choices that I decided to make, some of the harrowing results of those actions, the character relationships that I really enjoyed watching and being a part of, and we'll finish it off with some of the bugs that we encountered because we did have two more significant ones in this playthrough. Let's start off with our ragtag duo, Lee, the convicted murderer, who also ends up being our fatherly heartthrob, and probably the most precious human being I've ever met in this animated world, or any game world for that matter, Clementine, an unfortunately now orphan child taking up a new life in this post-apocalyptic world. They become an inseparable duo as Lee takes on the role of her dad, or at least as her guardian, guiding her through the decision-making process of what to do when it comes to zombies and relationships out in the field, trying to find shelter, how to protect yourself, all the things that a dad would hopefully teach you during the zombie apocalypse. The game does a great job at making us feel for both of these characters deeply. Although it doesn't do a good job of convincing me that he really murdered somebody, because he's such a gentle soul, Lee, and he really goes out of his way to look out for everybody. Although the man is good with a hatchet and will hack off his own limb if need be, so I guess he really does have a more aggressive side. But all of his decisions ultimately feel like they're geared towards the safety of Clementine over himself and the safety of the group over his own person. So he really just seemed like the leader of the group, even though there's a lot of political angst amongst the parties that you end up encountering along the way. Lee and Clementine were the only characters that I truly felt close to and I desperately wanted to keep alive throughout this entire playthrough. But of course, there comes the absolute heart-wrenching sucker punch in the gut ending of Season 1, where unfortunately Lee has gotten bit trying to find Clementine, who was kidnapped, and Clementine is forced to watch Lee slip away and inevitably kill him before he becomes a walker. Now, I made that choice to kill him. I felt that it was the strong decision for Clementine to experience, so that way he wouldn't have to live out his last few moments in agony as a walker, but also so that she might have the opportunity to remember that for the future to help her make tough decisions and to help me feel better about making tough decisions for her. But I'm not kidding, I cried my eyes out. This was horrendous. I hated the scene. It was so well done, and I will never forgive Telltale for this and for putting her, Clementine, in this situation. Let's move on from that though. This game was all about choices. And I didn't really understand what that meant going into a game like this, but holy cow, has it changed my interpretation of choose your own adventure games. I definitely went into this thinking that I could end the game with absolutely everybody alive and have a perfect playthrough, having made all of the best decisions. I quickly realized that I was grossly mistaken, and that just about every choice we would make would either impact the character's feelings towards us and inevitably wind up getting somebody killed, either by our own hand or by somebody else's hand within the group. One of my friendly viewers that had seen playthroughs of this game before did also warn me not to get close to anybody, because if there's an option to kill them, that means that they will not last very long down the road, because there has to be a reality in the game that you could live without them, which I thought was very solid advice, and also made me very hesitant and scared for every decision that came up, especially since they were QuickTime events. So it gave me a lot of anxiety trying to determine who I might want to live a short while longer with, and how somebody might die coming up, and if I should be scared if it was going to be extra gory or not. Now, because there's such a large variety of characters and choices to make that inevitably kill a lot of them, I'm only going to choose a few to talk about, because otherwise we'll be here for an hour. The first and one of the most prominent deaths in this game for me was Mark's death. Now this is because it didn't quite click in my brain how somebody I had left with a bow and arrow in their arm had later been discovered entirely limbless. When I tell you the nightmares that I had after this scene were absolutely horrendous. This is something that I've only seen in horror movies and in my nightmares. The concept of cannibalism is super popular when it comes to zombies because people inevitably become the bigger enemies than zombies, and this was just all too visceral for me to handle. Right alongside that though, only a few minutes after, is one of the scariest deaths because it happens to be so gruesome and so spontaneous, and this would be Larry's death. When Kenny decides to crash his head with a salt block, and that one will stick with me forever, and I'm sure it will stick with his daughter too. She may or may not be alive because of the decisions I made later, which brings me to the third death. 3 of these horrific deaths, one right after the other. This one would be Carly's death. Now I believe in this scene, you may actually be able to kill Ben, I'm not entirely sure. But because of all that Lily had gone through, she was very on edge, and she ends up having a moment where she gets a little crazy and shoots Carly point blank in the face. And this was really sad for me because Carly was on our mom list. We really thought she might make a good mom for Clementine, and that story might progress in the future because she and Lee kind of had a thing. They were very flirtatious. And to see her taken out in 2 seconds over a silly argument was heartbreaking. Of course, after this, I kicked Lily out of our van. She was not allowed to travel with us. I was not about to let her come back with us. So who knows, maybe we'll see her again sometime. Now let's talk about Katja's death and Ben's death, which were both pretty unique. Katja's death threw me through a loop because it's not something I could have ever imagined somebody doing. And when we came upon that scene, it was one of the worst moments to experience in the game emotionally. And also one of the most confusing. It just honestly had me stunned, kind of like Lee was in that moment. As for Ben actually can die in a surprising amount of ways, and that was a little concerning for me to witness. Most of the time, I actually had to replay Ben's scenes because my mouse or my keyboard would get stuck. He did actually last throughout almost the entire game with me, so I did get to witness every possible death scene for him, and it just made me feel like the producers really had it out for him. Let's move on to the glitches that I experienced in the game. There are only 2 that do really seem like true glitches and not just something wrong with either my technology or with something in the save file. The first one being at the dairy farm. Now, I think I've actually seen other people have this glitch where Lee gets stuck at the top of the staircase because at this point he cannot return downstairs to dinner. He has to discover Mark's dying body. Unfortunately, all of the arrow keys in certain locations of the game seem to convert to a particular direction based on the angle that you're in. And at this unfortunate moment, all of the directional keys that I could use would force him to go straight down the staircase, initiating this small little movement scene, instead of allowing him to turn left, right, backwards, back up in any sort of way. So we were perpetually stuck on the staircase for probably about 5 minutes before I ended up just restarting it, and then it was fine. But yeah, we just got stuck at the top of the staircase, having to hear weird groans from the cabinet where Mark was. Our second scenario takes place after we've come back from the train station with Clementine to talk to Omid and Kenny, who happen to be on the train itself. Now, the train completely phased out for me in multiple scenes. As you can see us coming into the train wasn't there, the staircase wasn't there, and now that we are in the train, all that we're seeing is Omid draped over the console. We can converse with him, but all we have is one spoken line. He doesn't converse back with us. We can no longer leave the train, we cannot move to other parts of the train, we do not see Kenny, and then we cannot interact with him either. I'm not entirely sure why the entire train decided to disappear. That would be really unfortunate during a zombie apocalypse. But it was funny, I thought, that you could see everything around it when walk on the train. But we did have to restart in order to exit the train or approach it at all during the rest of our playthrough. But luckily we had just hit a save beforehand, so it worked out great. At the end of Season 1, the game was kind enough to give us an overview of the choices that we made. Feel free to pause it on this page or the next page and tell me how your choices matched up with mine.